Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hi, everyone. Today we are speaking with Fabrice Grover, a nonprofit specialist. He's worked on everything from the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris and on President Obama's US-Africa Leaders Summit. Today, he works with high-need communities through a global remote reading program. Fabrice, I'm super excited to talk about this. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Tamara. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So when we think about, reading and, when we think about kids in school, it's always like reading and writing and arithmetic, right? That's what we've always been told. And I think that before you become a parent, you just assume that these things come naturally and you don't really need to worry about it. And I'm a parent now, and I know that that is not true. There's a lot of things to keep your eye on, and you don't know what's happening in a classroom and all of those things. It's a different experience for children that are living in less advantaged households. And there's a lot of struggle out there, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right. There's about 100,000 kids each year who complete grade 3 in Canada not reading at grade level by the end of third grade. So it's a sobering statistic. The data actually shows that if kids aren't reading at grade level by the end of third grade, they're 4 times less likely to graduate high school. The Annie E. Casey Foundation has done a ton of research on this, and it's the cornerstone of the President Obama's My Brother's Keeper campaign. And there's this whole grade level reading campaign that the Annie E. Casey Foundation has put together around this. That was actually primarily what drove me to bring the program to Canada. I originally found it in New York. I'm from Vancouver. I grew up in Coast Salish territory, used to teach at the Native Education College there. And then when I found the program in New York and was growing it in Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, Lower East Side, in the back of my mind, I was like, well, when am I going to get a chance to bring this home? I had seen firsthand my students at the Native Education College struggle with literacy, and I knew that there were a lot of less advantaged families in inner city schools in the Toronto area, but of course all over the country. So this was a real opportunity, I thought, for us to be able to bring something that I had seen be extraordinarily impactful to Canada.
So tell me, why do we have such a problem with literacy? I mean, 100,000 kids, that's a lot.
Yeah, and it's been that way for decades. Those are pre-pandemic numbers, and the numbers are bound to be worse now. It takes a while for the stats to come out, but the experts are saying that there are potentially years of deficit that have been exacerbated by this pandemic, and so it's crucial that we find resources to help children from less advantaged homes catch up. And even once that's done, we're still going to be in the same place where we were before, which was not good. So it's a big problem. COVID has exacerbated the problem, but it's been here all along. So it's really just shining a spotlight on something that is a problem of equity. And really, it's when you have families that have the resources and the time to read at home with their kids, those children grow up, exposed to more words. And they just have access to tutors if they need them. But mostly it's just that regular reading practice at home, which a lot of kids just don't get. If you're a frontline worker, you're working 2 or 3 jobs, you might be a newcomer to Canada, English might not be your first language. It's challenging for you to do that with, a young 1, 2, 3-year-old every day. So those children start school at a deficit. And that deficit compounds. And if we don't help those kids when they're first starting out, by the time they're 12, there's a 5-year gap. So the gap is smallest in kindergarten and first grade. That's why our organization, Innovations for Learning, is laser focused on helping first graders master the reading foundation, because there's a 90% correlation between first grade reading and third grade reading. If you're reading at the end of first grade, there's a 90% chance you're going to read at the end of third grade. And, effectively you're improving graduation rates by 350% if you just look at the stats. So it's an area where you can have tremendous impact if, you're a company looking to have impact. Our organization partners with companies in order to make this happen, right? So that was really my primary motivation in sort of getting this going here.
Where do learning disabilities fit into any of this? Are we talking about when you're saying these numbers, right? And Are you talking about typical children without learning disabilities? Are
Yeah,
we including everybody in this, or
it's
because
everyone. It's
okay.
everyone, and there are, naturally going to be learning disabilities with children in these communities, and that's just because, again, there's so many stressors. Um, and a lot of the children that we end up working with have undiagnosed issues because there haven't necessarily been the kind of assessments done to figure out exactly what's going on. That said, um, there are a lot of kids that don't have any sort of neurological or cognitive impairment and that could just get there with a little bit of extra help, and those are the kids that we're primarily focused on. We recognize we're a tiny little nonprofit, and we recognize that there are specialists out there that are going to work better with kids with disabilities because they have specialized training. We partner with virtual volunteer reading coaches. So a company will sign up, employees as reading coaches, and they will then serve as virtual volunteers will dial into classrooms and help kids learn to read. And then in parallel to that, we provide trained early literacy interventionists to the kids so that they have somebody who is there working every day for 5 minutes a day with each kid, helping them master the phonics foundation. So we've developed a custom web application that lets us track all of this in real time so that as the kids are working with we call them ELIs, early literacy interventionists, they are it's all their color coding mastery. So we know exactly where each child is, and they can get the kind of differentiated one-on-one instruction that teachers struggle to provide. Because of the size of this challenge, unless a school has provided a lot of expensive resources, and again, this tends to happen in better supported school systems, it's going to be a real challenge for teachers to overcome this deficit. So that's where having a trained paraprofessional in the classroom, providing this support, in parallel to everything that the teacher is doing, is really helpful. Of course, it won't replace having specialists who are there to help with kids who have very specific, disabilities or learning challenges that need more specialized intervention.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's quite complex, really. Like there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
And teachers are just overloaded, especially we've seen in the last, during the pandemic, right? It's been a lot. There's a lot going on. And I think that one thing that maybe we've learned is how diverse the needs are of every student in a classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And how can you teach all these diverse needs at the same time? So with a program like what you're talking about, how do families find you, or are you referred by, you said you're a small nonprofit, right? So do teachers know about you and they refer, or do...
Well, this is the thing, and this is why it's so wonderful that, there's interest and that the TELUS Friendly Future Foundation has given us this grant to get us started. So really what we do is we go to companies and we say to them, we have this program, we need your funding. And then once they give us the funding, we then approach schools and say, we have a subsidized opportunity for you. These ELIs that we will supply to your school will cost you less money than anything you could do independently, because it's subsidized by the corporation that's funding the program. And then we have this army of reading coaches who are signing up to provide virtual volunteers. So it's that combo of subsidized trained paraprofessionals plus the virtual volunteers that make this scalable. In the States, it exists in 28 major urban districts. In the UK, it's now in London, Leeds, Bradford, and is growing like wildfire. And here in Canada, it has tremendous potential too. What we need is to identify schools where this would be helpful. Because again, we've just started getting the word out. Initially, we've grown it by word of mouth. So we started in the Manitoulin region at Wemkwong Junior School. I actually just met the director of education at a Ontario Principal Council's 20th anniversary forum that I had crashed on my way into Canada, hoping to find people who would be interested in doing this. And they immediately glommed onto this and had me meet with their team. And they all looked at it and said, well, yeah, why wouldn't we do this? And over the years, they've actually helped us grow into other communities. So we now support different First Nations in the Manitoulin region: Whitefish River First Nation, Sagamok First Nation, Shigeen First Nation. We have our first fly-in community. Actually, thanks to that TELUS grant, we're going to get into a community called Moose Factory on the southern tip of Hudson's Bay in Moose Cree First Nation. And then they've introduced us to Lac Seul First Nation. So it's mostly, word of mouth referrals, to answer your question about how we get this, people. And we work primarily through the school system, because then we have, the structure of the classroom, and it's much more efficient to help children when they're in the classroom under the supervision of their teacher. And we just need 5 minutes of their time if we've got an in-person ELI, or a 30-minute window at some point during the week. So we have an online scheduling system for volunteers to call in. We install computers in those classrooms. So what we've really done is gone through the school system, just because that sort of cuts down on the logistics of meeting one-on-one with families and organizing time. Now, we are able to support families at home, and we are starting to move into that model, especially as children, have to stay home due to these different waves of COVID. And so during the last pandemic wave, we actually did that. We piloted a version of this program where we ported the entire thing. Jacob Pitawanakwit, our early literacy interventionist with Wemkung, actually took the whole platform, put it on made it work on a smartphone, so that volunteers could call families on their smartphone, and they would just have to pass the phone off to their kid, and the kid and the tutor would read together for 30 minutes, or the ELI, the early literacy interventionist, would work for 5 minutes with the child right on the family smartphone. And that worked quite well. So we now have that as an offering, and we've applied for several federal grants that would actually allow us to expand that model. And we're also looking at after school settings, because we've done this in the classroom, we've now done this in homes. What about in daycares? Could this be something that we do after school? So we're still waiting to hear on that piece.
So, and I'm curious, are you in every province, or are you mostly?
So we've started in Ontario, because this is where most of the corporations whose funding we need are headquartered. And so we are primarily here, but I mentioned I grew up on Coast Salish territory. The TELUS grant will actually allow us to go into Vancouver Island. We're going to start with School District 72, Campbell River. They've shown a lot of interest, and we're really excited to get started there. And then we are then going to go wherever the need is greatest. So we're talking to the Vancouver School Board, and then we also need to have more conversations with these different school districts in the BC area. So some companies are especially interested in helping us get into Alberta, because they have a large presence there. So that would probably be the next province. And then I'm personally really interested in remote northern regions. It could be in the Yukon or in Inuit territory. And there's just tremendous opportunity, because Canada has such a vast landscape, and distance is not an obstacle for tutoring. We can actually supply both the ELIs and the virtual volunteers as remote support. So it doesn't have to be somebody that's in the classroom. And all of this can happen in parallel to the existing curriculum that's happening in the school. So the school doesn't need to rejig its curriculum. It's just an extra support for them. And then if we can support families at home, then potentially we could do this. The sky's the limit, really.
Yeah, I mean, I love this idea. And I think that, it reminds me of a few things that I have experienced with my own children in, just getting that specialized instruction, if you will, or support, or whatever it means. But sometimes I find that you run into problems with the, how shall I say it, the bureaucracy of
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
There's school bureaucracies, there's bureaucracies at every level, and we come up against them all the time. But we try to be the river. I can't remember who said that, but it's like when you take a step back and you just go, okay, it's subsidized reading support based on this proven model of high dosage tutoring, which makes it more equitable for children to receive support because they don't need an hour of instruction. They need 5 minutes every day. You can get through 10 kids in an hour. And a school can contract us to supply that with this person, and we manage everything for them. And then they don't really need to, necessarily rejig their entire curriculum or modify their school routine. The teacher continues to do everything they're doing. This just runs in parallel. Now, there is this really wonderful dynamic that starts to form between the teachers and the ELIs as they realize, oh, this is what the child is working on. Okay, let me see if I can bring that into my classroom lesson. Or, there's this really cool connection that happens there. And then by the same token, when an ELI is working with a family, with a parent or a guardian or a brother or sister, whoever it is that's answering the phone when we call in, they are there's two things that happen there. One is that the family member is surrendering their phone for 5 minutes when it's an ELI conference, and they want to know what's going on their phone, so they're observing that session. So we then have a contact with the family. We talk to them beforehand, talk to them after, and they see precisely what it is that the ELI is working on with their child. So they are learning as they're doing that, and then they can have a conversation with the ELI about, okay, like what's the at-home activity that I can do to reinforce this? So COVID actually brought this about and sort of forced it on us, but it's a very happy accident because we had been for years wondering how to really connect with families at home. And we tried apps. A lot of programs are designed, they produce these apps, but then there's no scaffolding to actually use the app. So you have technology out there, but it doesn't get used. Or people don't know how to use it. Here it's about using technology to bring people together and leverage human resources more efficiently. So to get back to your question here about bureaucracies, usually when they recognize that this is a very efficient, scalable model, it's based on sound science and proven results. The results are extraordinary. 94% of the kids that had worked with Jacob, to continue with that example, through the pandemic at home, on family smartphones, achieve grade level proficiency by the end of their senior kindergarten year, compared to less than 5% of kids entering first grade before the program was there. And that mirrors studies from the George Washington University that have done randomized trials and looked at this and said, yeah, if you can just provide the right high dosage tutoring opportunity for these kids, the results are incredible.
Yeah, it sounds incredible. Okay, Fabrice, we like to thank our guests on this show for being here and spending their time with us. So we always ask them to choose a charity that's important to them, a Canadian charity, and we give that charity $500 in your name. I know this is shocking for everybody listening, but Fabrice chose early literacy interventionists in his own program. But it's not your program. This is a very important program for, I would say, hundreds of thousands of children across this country, right?
This has been, just such a joy to bring it here to Canada and getting it started, just because I've seen the results firsthand, and there's nothing more gratifying than that.
Yes.
We organize end-of-year celebrations where the kids get to meet their tutors face-to-face, and you just see the connection that they've formed. We're actually going to use that donation to pay for a computer for one of our ELIs that's just starting in one of these remote regions. So it was lovely.
That's amazing.
The TELUS Foundation.
Well, we are very, very happy to give Innovations for Learning $500 for your time for being here. I really appreciate it. And I just find everything that you're saying is fascinating. And it makes sense. We should be doing this.
That's the thing, right?
This is community care. This
Exactly.
feels like community care to me, right? We are all using our time and our energy to help children and their literacy because, as you say, it's a human right.
It is a human right, and it's not fair that people who just weren't born into the right, advantaged family then don't have the same advantages that other children have. And there's a lot that we can do to fix that. So it's not rocket science. It's really about how do we give children the toolkit that they need to decode words when they're young enough to overcome that deficit. And we can do that. It's totally doable. So yeah, I'm super excited that that we have this opportunity, and I'm excited to see where we go, because we've only scratched the surface. We're just getting started, and what we need is companies to follow TELUS's lead and sponsor the program. We need people to get behind this. We're just starting to hire the regular functions that a normal nonprofit would have, like a fundraising person, and so we'll be knocking on people's doors and doing more formal pitches. But in the meantime, if people want to learn more about the organization, they can go to innovationsforlearning.org. We have everything there. And in particular, if there are education leaders out there who are interested in subsidized reading support for first graders, reach out to us, because we have these opportunities. And part of our challenge is just getting in front of principals and superintendents and directors of education. So shout out to all of the education leaders out there. And if you know somebody who knows an education leader and might be interested, that would be an excellent referral for us. You can find us through the website.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, again, going back to the idea of, community care, we all play a role in this, right? Mm-hmm. It is a human right, and education is a human right in this country, and we need to support our kids. And some kids, like you said, are disadvantaged right from the get-go. So I appreciate you telling us how we can all do our part. I think one of the reasons you're so passionate about this is because you've seen how it works in other places. You've seen it succeed in England. You've seen it in the US. You've seen it. So is that your dream for Canada? What do you look forward to in the future? What do you dream about?
I think the other thing that makes this uniquely Canadian, so I've seen the result in the US when I was in those schools, that was what motivated me to bring the program to Canada. Now that I've been here for a couple of years, we're heading into our third year. What inspires me the most is this collaborative approach with the Indigenous communities that are embracing the program, and the adaptations that we are making as a result of their guidance. So we have asked these communities, what is it that you want to see in the platform? And they have said to us, we want to see more content that reflects the priorities of our community. And so we said, okay, how do we do that together? So we decided to co-create a series of leveled texts that are written and illustrated by Indigenous writers and local artists. And they explore themes that are important to the communities and that celebrate, Indigenous leadership, Indigenous innovation, land-based activities. These are the things that the local legends that they've given us as a mandate to explore. And now we're going out and actually co-creating these stories with them. Jacob Pitawanakwa went out onto the ice and documented an ice fishing expedition, which led by one of the land-based activity leaders in Witwamkung. And then we turned that over to a local artist who has created this book, this beautiful book called Mishumis and Macoons. It's our first book. We have recordings of elders speaking some of the Indigenous words that appear in the stories. So part of our goal with this is to actually introduce non-Indigenous participants to the original language of the region. So here we are in Ontario, and we have two official languages, English and French, but then there are all these other local languages that predate those by thousands of years. And wouldn't it be cool if, as we grow this support system across the country, we couldn't discover more of the original language of each region, the original culture of that region? So this is an opportunity for us to collaborate with the communities as we're developing these support systems. How do we also create materials that educate others And so it's a learning opportunity for the people who act as virtual volunteer reading coaches, and for anybody who wants to participate. So I'm excited about that piece. To me, that represents the future of Canada. Indigenous youth are the fastest growing population in Canada. And there is an extraordinary, power in there that we haven't tapped into yet. And there's been a lot of, talk, but not a lot of action. And there are a lot of gaps that people have uncovered. And there's also a lot of fear about how do we collaborate. So if we can provide ways for people to do that, and for companies, for example, to get behind this as part of their reconciliation mandates, for employees to be able to do something really meaningful on their job, because the volunteer reading coaches who are dialing into these classrooms and spending 30 minutes once a week helping these kids learn to read, they are, literally just spending 30 minutes out of their week. So, but they're doing something extraordinary. They're having immense impact, and we can measure that impact. So by developing something that's based on, data, we can then get funding from companies that are committed to, showing the result of their donation. But we can also tap into what you're referring to here, which is this spirit of wanting to do the right thing, And with all of these factors coming together right now, this need to serve reconciliation. What we're doing is the opposite of the residential school system, which forced children to abandon their languages and abandon their culture. And here we are, now able to do the right thing and, show children that we really care. And the director of the Wikwemicong Board of Education said to me, if you can get non-Indigenous participants just to start sounding out these words, it's going to communicate a lot to the children, because they then understand the value of that language, that there's interest in it beyond just our community too. And it starts to, really change perceptions. And I think what it ultimately changes how people vote. So what we're doing goes way beyond just helping a child learn to read. It's changing perceptions and attitudes as well. When you've worked with a child for 30 minutes once a week, by the end of the school year, that kid could be your kid. You're like, wow, I feel a real affinity to this kid. So there's a lot there. Yeah. And I think we've only just scratched the surface. So it's going to be exciting to see where it goes.
I love this. Thank you so, so much, Fabrice, for taking the time to talk to us. We've learned a lot here, and I just want everyone to know you can go to the Innovations for Learning website, which is innovationsforlearning.org. For all the information there, Fabrice, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tamara. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.